Hello everybody and welcome to, well, I guess the first review of a US Masters on this channel. I'm Visibly Riley, and today we'll be running through the aforementioned Masters event, which happened a couple of weeks ago in Nichols, I believe, New York. So I actually wanted to get this review out quicker, but much like quite a few people at the US Masters, I caught the flu there, and a couple of days later, I was fine, but I still didn't have my voice back, so here we are, a couple of weeks later, trying to get through this, and you can still hear it a bit in my voice. It's still getting better, but, we'll just have to suffer through. Now, before I go into the event itself, I'd like to give a big heartfelt thanks to everyone who donated to my GoFundMe to get me to the US Masters. You have no idea how much it means to me, and I just want to try to express a little bit here. In the last year, it's been very rough for me. Downturn in terms of market, some personal issues, and 3 fucking cars being destroyed. Granted, it was really only 2 cars that were completely destroyed, but then I also had replaced the transmission on one of those cars a month prior, so, might as well be 3 cars. So it's just been real bad, and in terms of money, I would have been completely unable to make such a long trip without help from viewers like you. So, as corny as it sounds, thank you so much. And honestly, it means more than you might realize, because over the last few months, I've been feeling a sense of ennui about doing this channel. It's, despite the fact that it doesn't look like it, it still is a lot of work, and it felt more like work than actual hobby time. And given I could be spending that painting or building terrain or helping run events out here, I just was wondering if it was even worth it. But honestly, going to the US Masters, I got to meet several of you guys, several of my viewers here, and that was a great experience, as opposed to the same 3 people who might as well be my mom telling me I'm pretty, telling me that they like my channel. So it was really nice meeting you guys, and on top of it, even the people who don't watch my channel, which, obviously shame on you, but it was just amazing to be reminded of the greater experience of Kings of War, at least in the US community. I didn't have a great mental image of the community as a whole, so this was very eye-opening for me. Very good. So anyway, with that out of the way, I'd like to thank 2 people in particular. My biggest donor was Dan Wright, or my biggest single donor was Dan Wright. We're bros for life, you know that. And then, of course, Dan Miner for running the whole thing for me. And with that out of the way, I just wanted to say thanks again. So let's move into my, into my list real quick. We're just gonna run through it. If you've watched my previous videos about it, you know my thoughts on the army, and if you don't, you can just go check some of those out and see through them. So first off, I brought Stalkers. I opened with a regiment of doppelgangers with Sir Jesse's boots. Then I had 2 Reaper regiments, a Butcher horde with a healing brew, 2 regiments of scarecrows, 2 regiments of soul flayers, 3 mind screeches, 2 planar apparitions, a Butcher flesh ripper with the trickster's wand, and a horror with the inspiring talisman, vicious melee aura, and Banechant 2 over lightning bolt. Again, if you want to see my thoughts on that list prior to the event, feel free to watch some of my older videos, and I will at the end of this probably talk a bit about my thoughts on it in the future. And here we see a picture of my finished army. I know that if you guys watch this channel, you know that I have no problems, no qualms running unpainted nonsense. So you don't get to see my painted models that commonly. I do run them at events, but I like to swap armies around a lot. So once I finish an army, I tend to just put it on the shelf and leave it there. So here it is, my Night Stalkers army in all of its, well, I guess, glory. And this picture isn't even mine. I stole it off of a Reddit post. So thank you, random Redditor that I didn't recognize, for taking a picture of my army, which I failed to do. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the event itself, the rules. First off, it was a 2,300 points event. It was held over 2 days, with 4 games being day 1 and 2 games being day 2. I would like to say real quick about this, I know a lot of people voted for 4 games day 1 and 2 games day 2 so they could drive, which is, fair enough, but I would really appreciate it if you thought of paying that forward a little bit, because as I said before, I had to fly, right? I live in Seattle. New York is the other side of the country, so I had to fly across, and that meant I had to take Thursday off to be there on Friday, right? Well, I could have flown in on Friday, I guess, but considering we got in at 3 a.m. on Friday morning, that would have been a little rough to go then play in a tournament. And then I left on Monday morning, and it was a 10-hour trip, right? It's about a 6-hour flight and about a 5-hour drive, but it ended up taking us about 10, and then I live about an hour away from the airport in Seattle. So yeah, this was a long one. And for those of you who say, well, I have to drive, so I would like to hit the road immediately, I can really appreciate that, but also understand that the people who fly also spend a ton of time on this, and maybe there should be a bit more give and take. 4 games in one day is just ludicrous, and 3 and 3 delays you by a day. That does suck, but we're all delayed the same that way, so we might as well just share in the burden, I think. But anyway, with that out of the way, there was Blackjack Scoring, which I've explained in previous videos, but it's essentially out of 21 points, you and your opponent, so you get 14 points for a win, 7 points for a loss, and then it's adjusted for attrition, and then that is further adjusted by, or not the attrition score, but the base score is adjusted by how much you won by, right? So if we're playing loot, for example, with 3 loot tokens, if I win by 3 loot tokens, it's different from winning by +1 loot token, right? So it's just a modified scoring system. Anyway, then there was the Masters Terrain rules, which were, I've explained them in the past with just talking about the heights of terrain, like a forest is height 9, a building is height 7, so on and so forth. But there was an additional quirk to that, which I actually really enjoyed, which was terrain maps. So each round, everyone played on the same table, essentially, by having a terrain map for that scenario in particular, which allowed the TOs to tailor things, to make sure that you're not covering the center point, with an big ol' impassable piece when you're supposed to be putting a token on it, so you don't have to move anything. So yeah, very interesting. I really enjoyed it for the most part, but you'll get some of my thoughts on that later when I talk about the terrain in my games themselves. And lastly, of course, there was paint judging and sport scores. The U.S. Masters declares the U.S. Master as the person with the highest battle points, which is obviously something it's a big achievement. It's really, really important. But to me, Paragon is always what I'm after and what I'm interested in. And Paragon is a mixture of, it's best overall. So it's a mixture of your paint scores, your battle score, and your sport scores. So that's sort of my thing. As for this event's paint judging, it was a little interesting, not necessarily bad, but I think maybe at odds with what some of the TOs I've heard them say. I feel maybe not Corey and John. I think your name's John. I'm sorry if I get that wrong. Have specifically stated, but on their podcast have been reiterated, which is that the paint judging their scoring system really helps them allow people to judge themselves each year. So like year 1, you show up, you get a 2, for example, and then year 2, you show up and get a 4, which I'll explain those points in a second, and you're like, oh, I did 2 better. But unfortunately, because this is scored on a curve, that doesn't actually happen. Because the paint scoring for this system is that you are scored 1 to all the people in the tournament, in this case 64. So you're given a ranking 1 to 64. So if I'm in 37th place, I'm better than the person in 38th, but worse than the person in 36th in terms of the subjective paint scoring. And my problem with that is that how do I show up the next year and really know if I've improved, besides obviously talking to the judge each time, right? Which this year I didn't have a chance to talk to the judges. I know that Corey had a family emergency and had to dash away immediately, and of course that's understandable, but this was my first Masters, and I had met most of the people in the room, so it's a little difficult to, carve out time for talking about my army when I've just played 4 games. I'm super tired. You're probably tired of running 2 events. And then I, want to go out drinking with these people I just met or want to get dinner or whatever. So it's just a little difficult to understand how you see yourself grow in events that do subjective scoring like that, or that do not just subjective scoring, but that score you on a curve, right? when you're comparing yourself to other people for the entirety of your score, it's a little difficult to get anything out of it. But I don't think the system itself is wrong, and in fact, at events I've run and been a part of and helped do the scoring systems, I also do this, but I use a rubric, an actual rubric, that people can then get a copy of. Even if they don't come talk to me about their score, I will give them it, and it'll mark down my thoughts on things, no explanation, but mark down, shading, blah, 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 whatever I wanted. And then I give people a scoring based off of how they scored on that. So, in terms of scoring the event, it's a lot easier just to go, you got second in painting. But do it how you want, of course. And then lastly, sports scores. Sports scores I have a big problem with. Not as a core concept, I think sportsmanship is very important, but I think favorite opponent is a problem. Because the biggest problem of it is that it's a lot of recency bias, especially in 2-day events. The closer you are to the last game, the more likely that person is to score highly on your sheet, because, of course, you just played them, and assuming it was a good game, even if it's not a better game than the other games you played, you have it fresh in your mind, right? So I have a problem with that sort of a scoring method, on top of the fact that I believe the scoring packet said we could not vote for anybody in region that we played for sportsmanship, and we had to vote the top 5 people, which I'll go over in a second. And day 2, you can play someone from your own region. So what were we supposed to do? This was something that happened with my team, and it was something that, we just went to the TO and got cleared up. But their explanation was we could only vote them second place, which, again, I don't get. I kind of get the idea that you're trying to make it so people can't game the score, but you're already allowing us to game the score, or quote, game the score, by playing against people we know and have played many times already. So what's the harm, right? I just don't get it. If you're going to trust people to score correctly, just trust people to score correctly. Or get rid of the system. I like having favorite opponent as a prize. I just don't think it should be part of best overall. I think sportsmanship scores should be things like, and I know this has been talked to death by a million people, but my thoughts are just, sportsmanship should be a question of what did you actually do on the table? Did you show up with all your stuff? Were you non-abrasive? Stuff like that. And then have a favorite opponent as a separate component in the same way that you can have a player's choice and a best painted as 2 different awards, right? So anyway, that's my sportsmanship spiel, and that's about it. So let's go into the event itself. So for round 1, I was playing Dominate. Dominate is a very simple scenario. You just measure from 12, or it's a 12-inch radius in the center of the field, and at the end of the game, the person with the highest unit strength, which is scored by the units with their majority of their footprint in that 12 inches, wins. That's it. In Blackjack, it is modified by how much unit strength you have over your opponent. So if I have 0 unit strength, but you only have 1, you still don't get max points, right? So you'd have to, I think it's +4 unit strength or +6, something like that. Anyway, I ended up playing against the inimitable Keith Conroy from the Northeast in their herd list. I really like this army, and it opens with a horde of Spirit Walkers with the Brew of Haste, followed by 2 Lycan hordes, one of whom has the Chalice of Wrath, the other the Dwarven Ale. Then we have 2 regiments of Centaur Bray Striders, one of whom has the Blade of Slashing. Then we have 3 Harpy troops, 2 Beasts of Nature, both of whom have wings and 7 attacks as upgrades. We have Moon, the Great, or better known as Moonfang. And then finally, 2 Druids, both of whom have Banechant 2 and Forest Steeds, and then one has the Shroud of the Saint to make their heal 2 into a heal 5, and the other has the Conjurer's Staff for a reroll on those spells. So my thoughts on the army, very, very interesting. I like Herd a lot. I think they've got a lot of play. I know the Herd community has been a little butthurt about about a lot of their, or some of their units disappearing, like Great Eagles, and all that sort of nonsense. And I'm like, yeah, I get it, but your army is still pretty cool. It has a lot of variability to it, and that's one of the main keys I look for in an army if I think it's interesting. Is it a monolist, right? Are there multiple unlocks? Are there multiple units, multiple routes to go? And I think Herd do have that, even if they're all kind of melee. So as far as this list goes, it's very fast, great Alpha Strike army. I do think it has a bit of a weakness in that if it faces off against a ranged army and it doesn't win that all-important turn 1 roll, it could have some real problems. But, just win the roll off for turn 1, you're good to go. Anyway, cool army. Keith, by the way, before I get into the report, a great opponent actually gave me a beer on day 2. He promised me, we played game 1 of 4 on day 1, and day 2 he walks over to me while I'm playing it wasn't day 2, sorry. During game 3 after lunch, he walks over and goes like, hey man, I owe you this beer, and I might have been a little out of it by that point, but just real cool guy. I love playing this game. Anyway, let's get into the game itself. So, like I said before, this is not going to be really fancy reports. I have variable pictures, but since it's round 1, I have the most pictures of this one. So let's go over the terrain real quick. We've got 2 of these height 9 forests, then we have 2 height 7 impassables with 2 height 2 obstacles right there on the table, 2 height 3 hills, and 2 height, I think they were height flat, not height 1, just pieces of rough terrain. So as you can see, this is what I mean by the tables have a layout. So you have a grid that tells you, this forest is 12 in and 13 up or whatever to the center. So you get to place the army out for dominate, right? So the 12-inch is pretty barren of terrain, but it still has these large pieces sort of blocking things up. So cool map. And again, the terrain at this event was really impressive. I know that it wasn't just one group in the Northeast. I think this table was a War Kings table, so it's really cool to see a community, especially one as coherent as the Northeast has, come together and produce a spectacular result. And this isn't particularly... This is not like, oh, this terrain blew my mind. It's just, I can obviously see that someone tried really hard on this, right? Like, the intention is there, it looks good, and that's all you really need. You don't need this, wet blended oil work. You just need something that shows that it's got a little love in it, and not that kind. So anyway, let's talk about the game, and I'm going to open with the first mistake I made of it, which is my deployment. So it is dominate, and this table's a little difficult for my army because I have no Pathfinder at all. I have several flying units and then one unit with a poppable Strider, but I have no base Pathfinder at all. I'm also pretty slow. So I've got the 2 speed 10 flyers, but then everything else is 6. I've got a 7 here, right? And then I've got 2 4s. So I'm a slow army against this herd army, which is very, very fast. And anyway, so it sort of got me going, well, it's dominate, this is the only area without a bunch of terrain, I'm going to set up here. And it's not necessarily a terrible idea, but it is really, it's really pushing for that turn 1. I'm basically going, I bet I'll win the roll-off, right? Because if I win the roll-off, I push into the center, and then these units have to actually work around, right? They have to come in and actually come fight me, because I can have these weaker backfield units or my wind blast really start messing with them and screwing up the deployment. But if I don't win that roll off or turn 1, things can turn ugly quite quickly against an army this fast. So anyway, with that said, I didn't win the roll off, so my opponent advances forward, just sort of goes for a classic pincer move, comes around the sides. I decide to go for some charges, because, well, I could, and I needed to regain the tempo. I think this is going to be a tempo matchup. At least that's the way I'm going to treat it, meaning that I'm not here to just hold back and push for a late game draw, because my army is not particularly tough. I can't just sit in the center and hold it, nor can the herd, but they're significantly faster than I am, so I have to do something. So I go for a charge first onto the lichens, which are only def 4, they're not full-on werewolves. And I get a charge with some soul flares in the front and some scarecrows in the front. So I've got quite a few attacks. I think I can at least get a waiver there. Unfortunately, I roll pretty poorly with the soul flares. I mean, I roll pretty average with the scarecrows, but soul flares mess it up. Small dice, large variance. And I don't get a waiver. And on top of that, they also regen all the damage I did, which is, I do like 4 points of damage, and then they regen it all back. So that was unfortunate. Then I also go for a charge over here onto Moon. I could get a lucky waiver here on Moon. I don't think too much of it, but I'm just trying to hold up these units. But I miscalculated how close Moon and the lichens were. I thought they were actually flush when I went for this charge, or at least that's what I'm gonna say. I will say before this game, you can see my apple juice. That is because every night of this event, including Thursday night when I showed up at 3, I stayed out drinking till about 5 in the morning. So I showed up on day one, pretty hungover. Went downstairs to Dan Wright and Dustin Church's room, which are my fellow Pacific Northwest players, and went, "Where is that bourbon I left?" Poured myself a quad shot, and then Dan turned to me and went, "Hey, why don't you come here a minute?" And just started tipping a bit of Everclear into my glass, and just went for a pretty generous pour, probably about 2 shots of Everclear in there, which is a 180 proof alcohol. I was very impressed earlier because Dustin had brought the Everclear, that he was purposefully measuring, his shot glasses, even while just blasted. But Dan and I didn't have that sort of forethought, and so I showed up to this game, a little bit more than a hair of the dog. So yeah. Anyway, I messed up this maneuver, and these lichens can easily just go around and go into these scarecrows. So not the best move. And here is the, I think this is after turn 1. Yeah, this is after turn 1. So you can see I'm sort of spreading towards the center. I think I should have pushed a little harder, but this is my full 10 with this unit. So I wanted to maintain my battle line so that there was no tricksiness going on. And of course, this unit being speed 7 with wild charge D3, it's got a 17-inch charge. I want to make sure that if it does charge, it'll hit the barrier. So I can't have this unit within 17, for example. So anyway, that's the plan. We go into some other turns. So this is after turn 1 for my opponent. Moon regens almost all the damage back. So I think I got 3 wounds on Moon, and then down to 1. Kills off my Soul Flayers in one go, which is pretty much how this entire game goes. These Scarecrows get killed in one shot. This is my turn 2. So the Scarecrows, when my opponent chooses to charge, they chose not to before, gets the one shot on them. This Chimera charges into the front of this planar apparition, and even on 4 as a hit with 7 attacks, one shots it. The only thing that goes really poorly for my opponent is that this unit of Centaur Bray go into the rear of my unit of Soul Flayers, and one, they don't roll particularly well. I think they only put 8 wounds on me, but then they also double one it, so funny there. But unfortunately, because the werewolf or the lichens had regened all their wounds back and also one-shot my Scarecrows over there, it's unlikely that I'll be able to kill them back. And yeah, so I don't kill them back, and even the damage I do manage also gets regened all back, so it's pretty bad. And as the game progresses, you can just see, I think this is the final shot of the game that I took. So everything I have just gets one shot in this game, just boom, 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 right? Like, this is a flank and a rear, that's pretty bad, but that's after something else happened, and like this unit of Reapers charged into the front of a Chimera and couldn't even waver it. So it's just, it's a mess of a game. I think I lost this game, partially through not being sober enough to really play it, but also just on deployment. I think that Keith just outplayed me, did a great job, and got that all-important turn 1 roll, right? So, but I think I actually get tabled in this game. I think I lose everything. I might not lose this one horror, but I lose essentially everything. I kill basically nothing, because the only thing I managed to kill is that horde of Spirit Walkers, because I send my unit of Doppelgangers in there. They get to charge in, steal his attacks. Don't get the Thunderous, but I believe I get a Bane Chant. I've got Vicious, so I just blow right through them. But everything I have fails otherwise, and everything he has just one-shots all my units. So some unfortunate dice turned a loss into a crippling loss, and with that, we move into Game 2. So Game 2 was Push. Push is one of my favorite scenarios. I really enjoy it. Normally you have D3 loot tokens. In Blackjack, you just have 3 loot tokens per side, and then you have 1 in the dead center of the field, meaning that there's 7 loot counters in total. You can place the 3 that you receive anywhere in your deployment zone, or you can place them on some of your units if you want, which is generally what people do. You get 2 VP if your loot counter, for every loot counter you have that's entirely on your opponent's side of the field, while you get 1 VP otherwise if you just hold a loot counter. So it's a pretty fun scenario, and let's get into the list. So we were playing against Brian Ring, who is another Northeast player. This one was kind of fun because at the beginning of the beginning of the tournament, they handed us this weird head garment, like alien spring pom-poms. and then some Mardi Gras beads that were color-coded based on your region. So the person that was the lowest ranked player in the region that was on the team got them for round 1, which was not me. But since the entirety of the Pacific Northwest lost their round 1, and considering I saw all of them drinking, that wasn't particularly surprising. They were down there in the drinky crow room. We all lost, and we had to determine who lost the biggest, which it turns out was me with my mighty 1 point. So I show up for my game 2 with my regalia on, and I see Brian sitting there in a very similar but differently colored regalia. And I went, oh, that's interesting. And I also see that they're playing Night Stalkers. So I walk over and go, I see neither of us really understand how the army works. Just as, a little jest, I wasn't trying to be mean. And Brian's like, yeah, I haven't played the army a whole lot, but if you want to learn, do you watch YouTube channels? I'm like, oh yeah, of course I do. I love battle reports. And he's like, oh, you should check out this guy, do you watch Visibly Riley? And I went, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you are, I don't watch Visibly Riley because I have to live that. So it was pretty funny being recognized and not recognized at the same time. But anyway, let's go through Brian's list. It opens with 2 regiments of Reapers, followed by a horde of Scarecrows, followed by 2 regiments of Scarecrows. Then we have 2 Reaper troops, one of whom has the Brew of Strength. I know Brian told me that the Brew was supposed to be on a Reaper regiment to begin with, but accidentally clicked it on the wrong unit and had already submitted his list, so, more power to him, he played it out correctly. Then we have 2 Void Lurkers, one of whom has the Mead of Madness. Then we have 2 Mind Screeches, 2 Phantom Troops, and 2 Horrors, both of whom have the Vicious Melee Aura and Bane Chant 2, not replacing their Lightning Bolt, so they still have that going for them. As for my thoughts on the army, I think it's pretty cool. I think Night Stalkers just have a lot of builds that they can do, just a lot of powerful units. And I don't particularly rate Reaper troops. I don't like them very much. That's just because their nerve is a little low for how common it is that a monster or a tall unit has some sort of ranged attack just to remove them quickly. So I'm not a fan of Reaper troops. I know other people are. More power to you. But otherwise, I really like this army, and it's actually a little closer to what I think I might be doing in the future for a bit with Night Stalkers. Again, Night Stalkers have a lot of builds. So let's look at the table. This is the only picture I have of the battle, and it was kind of funny because I took this right after Ronnie Renton had shown up to take pictures, and originally he was like, oh, I see some Mantic zombies, and he leaned in, looked at him, and went, oh, there's some filthy other models in there. And you could just see him hemming and hawing about like, oh, should I take a picture of this or not? And in the end just went like, oh, Brian has Mantic models, and just took pictures of those instead. So that was kind of fun. As for the battle itself, it went a little... It was a little lopsided, and I think a lot of that comes down to, again, the dice rolling, which is, I had some moves where like I had my Soul Flares. You can see here, my opponent has laid out a line to make it so my Soul Flares can't do anything, except there's easily a spot right here that I can just fly 20 and pivot and nothing can see me. Then I can do whatever I want. So unfortunate there, but then he gets me back because the next turn I had charged into one of these units, killed it off, and then I just left them there. I forgot to move them on my turn, and that got a rear charge with some Reapers into them, and I just pooped them. So, but otherwise, yeah, some pretty crazy dice. These Reapers, I think, charged into my Reapers, or these Reapers, and are just barely not hindered because I messed up my movement. But then Brian obliged by just not rolling well enough to even waver me. So, yeah, just a lot of dice going on. The epitome of it being that I sent my Butchers into these Scarecrows over here eventually. And I charge in. Butchers hit on a 4+ with 18 attacks and are crushing 2. Scarecrows are defense 3, so that's 18 4s and 2s. I rolled a hit. I get 13 hits, and I'm like, wow, that's really good. And then I rolled a wound, and I rolled 11 1s. So I started laughing at this, and I think Brian might have been taken a little aback by that, because he's like, well, you're still doing really well in the game. And that's not really... I was laughing because that's just a ludicrous dice roll. And in fact, I then rolled a nerve check. I had already put 2 wounds on the unit using Lightning Bolt, I believe. And I just, rolled a 10. I think I actually rolled the 10 twice. No, I only had to roll it once. So I just rolled a 10 and killed it in one go. So, I still killed the unit. It was just a funny roll. But yeah, these things don't go particularly well for Brian. I know that this Void Lurker went into my unit of Soul Flayers here. They are hindered because of my placement, my unit placement, but in the end, they don't even waver me. So I charge into the Void Lurker with that. I had a flank charge with this, and it's just a mess. So yeah, I end up winning this game with 19 points, I believe. Brian ended up having one loot token that they moved around, and that was the determinant to figure out whether it was a 21 or a 19. So, you know, fight till the end at least. Really cool. And yeah, it was a very enjoyable game. I hope to play Brian in the future. Really fun. And here we see a picture of, this is my horror model, and I had dropped it on this, I mean, it's hotel carpet, so it's always atrocious, and I dropped it on that floor while walking with my tray, and I had to just come back for it later. By the time I came back, I'm like, I cannot find this thing. It should be pretty easy, because you know, the floor was relatively clean from clutter, it was just garish. So I enlisted 2 more people to come help me, we're all looking for it, and we find it in this bag strap. So I dropped it, it had flipped, landed on its base in a bag strap, then the strap had covered it, and it was just completely hidden. It's not scratched, it wasn't broken, it was just a pretty funny moment. I thought I'd share it with all of you. So let's move into game 3. So game 3 was smoke and mirrors. I've got 1 big win and 1 colossal loss at this point. So, you know, we'll see what this is. Smoke and mirrors, pretty fun scenario. You get 10 bluff tokens in this one, so 5 for each side. 2 of the ones that you get, so each player gets 5. 2 will have 0 on the back, 2 will have 1, and 2 will have 2. And that's the number of victory points these objective markers are worth each. When you deploy them, they have to be deployed fully on your opponent's side of the field, and then otherwise they follow the normal restrictions, so more than 12 inches away from objective markers, including the ones that your opponent's going to place down, and more than 3 from impassable terrain. And that's about it. Oh, you do reveal them because they are placed face down. You reveal them 1 at a time at the end of each turn, and you roll off to decide who flips first. I don't fucking get, this is a terrible, terrible roll. Why are we rolling off, right? It should just be maybe a roll off at the beginning of the game. Maybe it's just first player. I don't care. Just leave it or alternate. It doesn't matter. Just don't waste time rolling fucking dice when you don't need to. God, I hate that. So anyway, otherwise the scenario is super fun. Here we see my round 3 opponent, which is again a Northeast player, Josh Rosado, and their Retkin. So we open with 3 regiments of warriors, then we have 2 regiments of tunnel runners, one of whom has the potion of the caterpillar. Then we have 2 hordes of shock troops, both of whom have plague pots, and then one has brew of sharpness, and the other brew of strength. Then we have 3 troops of claw shots, not going to do a whole lot against the Night Stalkers. Then we have a brood mother with a loot of insatiable darkness, interesting upgrade, and a night terror along with Mother Kryza with the Veil of Shadows upgrade, 2 weapon teams, and finally a war chief with the wings of honey maze. Yeah, Josh's list is pretty good. I actually really like this. There are only a few things I look at and I go, I probably wouldn't have that in my version, which is I don't like the Night Terror. I mean, it's good. I know a lot of people get a lot of mileage out of these units. I just personally don't. So I look at the Night Terror and go, that could probably be better for me. And then the War Chief with Wings of Honey Maze, it is good, and I might play with it a bit, but I'd rather just have an Assassin with Wings of Honey Maze over a War Chief. Just a personal preference thing. So anyway, I think otherwise the list really cool. All the items are excellent, and boy is it I was about to say garbage. It's gorgeous. This army is gorgeous is what I wanted to say. So we've got the 2 regiments of tunnel runners. Just look at these guys. And I've got some close-ups later in the game, but just a gorgeous army. We've got these little plague pots, which I didn't even notice until I was going through the pictures for this battle report, which is the toppers, or the stoppers here, are marked with the Skaven, the Skaven 3 triangle logo, right? Just what a cool army. And you can pull out the stoppers. So these are obviously the plague pods. You pull out the stopper to mark that the unit has popped it, right? But it's still on the table, and then you remove the entire bottle when it's done. Just great stuff. Really high quality. Just blown away by this army. And yeah, so I also had a great time playing Josh. I had met him kinda on Thursday night or Friday morning, depending on how you see it. But he was very into his cups by the time I showed up. So it was nice to see him again, at least relatively sober for the 2 of us. I might have been a bit more into it, although I was pretty sober by game 3. It'd been a couple hours. But yeah, I did look at him, and at the beginning of the game, I just went, I'm just going to randomize my tokens, which I did, and then I just sort of threw them wherever I wanted, and then measured to make sure that they were, legal, so more than 12 inches away, more than 3 inches from impassable. And Josh went, but why do this? And the answer is, I don't particularly take the game that seriously. So that's how I deployed him. Josh had a bit more intention in his deployment, so fair enough. But both of us did the 3 and 3, right? So you've got an objective 3 inches from the corner and then 3 inches from the side, and then you do the opposite side as well. So we just had, we had all the objectives in the 4 corners of the table. So it's it's just something to do. And when we started playing at the very beginning of the game, Josh was like, wow, you got those 3 mind screeches, that's a lot of lightning bolt. And I'm like, I think you mean a lot of mind fog. And he was like, they have mind fog? And I was like, they have mind fog 6. And he's like, wow, terrible. And I'm like, I'll show you. So in this game, I cast Lightning Bolt on turn 1, and mostly, well, I did cast Lightning Bolt later too, but I really enjoyed casting Mind Fog at Josh just to show him what's what. It didn't work, but I also got to charge quite a bit with the Mind Screeches, which did work, and it was funny every time. So, for example, like I left, I think the War Chief with the Wings of Honey Maze, somewhere over here, and this, oh no, this is after it. So it was within range to charge this Mind Screech, and he's like, you wouldn't have done that. And I'm like, no, I definitely did that. I did that on purpose, which I didn't. But he takes a charge, goes in there, it's a hindered charge, does a couple of wounds, doesn't waver me, and I'm like, I'll just charge you with the Mind Screech back. And the Mind Screech, just one-shots him, just a casual one-shot. Mind Screeches are melee killing machines, and everyone should know it. So it was a pretty funny game in that way. And also because as we go later into these pictures, I think this is the only other one I have, which is just, this is the the Broodmother just completely surrounded by the Night Stalkers deep in my deployment zone. There were some small or large mistakes, depending on how you want to see it. There was a shock troop horde here, and Josh had charged into, I believe, my Butcher Flesh Ripper, who had failed to kill these warriors, even with a flank charge. I think I did like 2 damage. I did terribly. But charged into the Butcher Flesh Ripper and killed him. But forgot to pop Plague Pots after that, and I could finagle some charges here, so I ended up getting a unit of Reapers, which were originally here, to charge in, and this was perfectly, I was perfectly able to slide down, which means that I also could charge in with this planar apparition and also these soul flares. So I got a triple charge, I got the Bane Chant going, I have the Vicious Aura, and I just run right through them. And on top of this, Josh is like, why did I not pop my Plague Pots? Like, they were obviously going to go forward. Why would I not pop them? And I'm like, yes, this is a question for the ages. And he wasn't like going, I want to take that back. He was just, he was incredulous because both of us were just doing some stellar moves. The difference being, I rolled what is called hot, and Josh did what is called not hot. So yeah, bit of a dice kerfuffle there, a few mistakes, and then there was one big one in that I told you before. We've got the 4 corners, right? Minor random, so I think one ended up being a 0 and one ended up being a 1. But Josh had thought that the one on my left side was the 2-point token, right? So he had, if you can look in this picture, you can see the Tunnel Runners and Kryza are moving there. There's also a unit of what are they? The gun guys. I've lost the Claw Shots. Yep, Claw Shots over there, which got killed immediately because they got charged by Soul Flares. But these units are just moving around. I don't have anything over there but some Soul Flares and some Scarecrows, right? And unfortunately, Josh had accidentally put the 2-point token on my right side, which is behind this forest, and I have a unit of Scarecrows on it. So yeah, just throw away 2 points, go after that 0, hot 0 there. But it ended up not really mattering too much because these guys got into a protracted combat with the Soul Flares behind them, and the Soul Flares won that fight. Granted, these Soul Flares also came in later after finishing this off. But yeah, it was just a mess of dice and some poor maneuvering, just showing off. Game 3, it's the end of the day. But unfortunately, as I said before, it's not the end of the day. This ends up being a 19-2 as well. So I'm rocking some pretty hefty wins and one big loss. So I'm a little above the middle of the pack. And I go into game 4, which is loot. At least it's a simple one, but boy, do I hate loot. I'm not a fan of it. I'll go over it. I will go over it later, but it's just a little too easy to have certain armies that just win at it. So you place 3 tokens exactly on the center line. 1 is placed in the exact center. You get 1 VP for every loot counter you hold at the end of the game. Sounds simple, because it is. And here is my opponent's list. Alex Chavez. Oof. So before going to this event, I don't think I can deal with armies where the entire thing is speed, so like an all-cav army, for example. And more importantly, I don't have enough crushing strength to really deal with a Def 6 bomb army. And Alex is like, how about Def 6 bomb army with just speed otherwise? And I went, great, let's do it. So yeah, Alex shows up with this pretty cool army. It's free dwarves. We open with 2 free dwarf shieldbreaker regiments, followed by a free dwarf Brock Rider regiment with the Potion of the Caterpillar, then 3 hordes of earth elementals, 2 regiments of free dwarf Brock Rider troops, or 2 troops of free dwarf Brock Riders. Then we have 2 dwarf lords on large beast, Sverri Egalax on Hellbrock, that is the special berserker lord, the free dwarf lord with Wings of Honeymaze and Lord's Jewel to get the Iron Resolve for dwarves only, and then a free dwarf stone priest with Martyr's Prayer 7. So yeah, this is a tough rock to bust. It is a good list. I like it a lot. It could be a lot more annoying. I know that Alex said originally it had a lot of shooting in it, but he was bored with that, and I'm like, yeah, more power to you. And Alex, being a previous US master, obviously no slouch. So this is a bit of a nightmare scenario because I'm playing against an army that is a hard counter to mine. I'm playing against a very competent player. I'm playing at the end of the day when I am too tired to function, and I'm playing in a scenario that heavily favors my opponent. But that's actually just a challenge. So I'm like, yeah, no, this is going to be great. It's a great learning experience. So especially after that colossal loss in round 1, I'm like, I'm not in contention for anything. So we end up setting up into the game. I don't have too many pictures of it, but this is a big failure for me, which is in this turn, is that my opponent wins the roll-off for turn 1. I don't think did I ever win the roll-off for turn 1 in this tournament? I'm not sure I did, but this is another big one because in loot, it's all about taking the center and holding it. So these guys are great at taking the center and holding it, and on top of it, if I get turn 1, I can just rush in, right? And so it holds them back a little bit because I can exert enough pressure to, if I get double or triple charge onto a unit, and since I'm regiments, I could get that, I can really mess them up, and they have no ranged, right? The only thing they can do is send their speed elements into me, and since they're melee, it's not exactly assured. So yeah, I lose the roll for turn 1, and that's a big bummer. But the dwarves move forward. I do end up taking a charge here with my soul flares into these Brock Riders. It doesn't go, I think, did I kill these Brock Riders? I'm not sure what I did to them, but it goes interestingly. And then Sverri, I get a great lightning bolt turn here. Sverri's a 4 defense and then dash 18, and I believe I did 10 damage to him. I did like a crazy number. I don't get the kill, that's understandable. And then the Martyr's Prayer goes off and only heals like 3 of the wounds off. So sitting there on 7 wounds, I'm like, right, on turn 2, I've still got the triple lightning bolt threat on him, and I just roll poor. So it's just, it's stuff that happens with swinging lightning bolt. It's just a small number of dice, so it has, again, high variance. So but Alex was happy enough to oblige by sending both of these earth elementals, since I had some soul players up here, sends the earth elementals into them and just, gets a hot double 1. So that's double 1/1 for the game. And then the next one happens over here, which in this picture you can see the Sverri goes into the side of my butchers. These guys go into the front of my butchers. This is after a failed charge where I sent the butchers and my doppelgangers into a unit of rocks and just failed. So, just dice be dice. But then, it goes for this charge, and now it's like, what if I double 1 again? So I'm still in the fight. You can see over here, yeah, it's a flank charge from rocks and a front charge from rocks, and that's a devastated unit because they got double 1'd. So yeah, I'm like, cool. With those double 1s, I'm still fighting for this game. I could win it, right? Like, I've got a flank with Reapers on Sverri. That's an easy kill there. I've got plenty of Lightning Bolt and Wind Blast to do stuff. I've got Dread, right, on these units. I can just get, just pull it back together. I have another unit of Soul Flares just like in the back over here, really threatening all these units. And unfortunately, let's go back to this picture because I don't have any more. Unfortunately, I don't manage the dice rolls to do it. So yeah, Alex did not roll well in this game. He rolled pretty average, or maybe, he got 2 double ones, but also I guess I'm not saying that he rolled average. He rolled average to hit and then got those double ones, so that's pretty bad. But then I rolled significantly below for a lot of my attacks to really push on those double ones, right? To really capitalize. So it was a bit unfortunate, but again, this is a really tough matchup. And in the end, I did have the Brock Riders, these Brock Riders regiment right there. I had a flank charge on them with my Soul Flayers over here, and Alex had thought that they would end up in the train. They didn't, so it was an unhindered charge. So it's 18 attacks on 3s and 2s. I again hit with 13 attacks, and then I roll 8 1s. So just hot yikes. And Alex was like, wow, what a bad roll. And I'm like, let me tell you about the time I rolled 11 1s earlier on 2s. So a bit funny there. I do manage, the Brock Riders just leave, and it's a bit of a mess. The Brock Riders are a big element of getting this token right here, because I didn't manage to kill them off, because these guys now don't have to worry about what I had in the center, because I believe I killed off these rocks, and then I killed off Sverry, and then I had all my units here, granted damaged, but ready to go. And unfortunately, these Brock Riders can just come in, kill off my doppelgangers. These guys get killed off by whatever, I think it's rocks that kill them, but they die anyway. And then I only have the Reapers left, and that's just not enough meat. I also made a mistake with these Scarecrows. I turned to face this Dwarf Lord, but that was after I had actually moved everything out of the Dwarf Lord's range, so there's no reason to do that. And I turned to face it with my flank. I just went, yeah, flank charge me, because I wanted him to stay over here on this side of the field, but I could have just had it in the front. But anyway, here's the beer from Keith. I drank it in this game. So yeah, a bit of a mess. There is one point I do want to talk about, last point of the game, which is towards the end of the game, this Dwarf Lord had grabbed this token and thought about running away, but thankfully they didn't, because this Dwarf Lord is the only reason why my unit started to crumble in the center, because as I said before, I had pretty much everything. This was dead and this was dead, but all of this was alive. So this Dwarf Lord is what's actually coming in and finishing stuff off, as opposed to letting me get a second try after rolling abysmally on my first try. So good thing they came back to the center. And lastly, this unit of rocks had this token, right, and was just sitting on it, but also had like 7 wounds or so. I'd killed off the Stone Priest at that point, so no healing. And I had a front charge with a unit, or with one of my planar apparitions, and I believe I also had Reapers. And then I had a flank charge from my Soul Flayers, right? We measured it out, and I'm like, well, that's obviously the flank. And Alex turns to me and says, well, I thought, no, I had told you that I was trying to avoid getting flank charged with this. And I went, I don't remember you saying that at all, but pretty tired. 4 games is a lot, and this is the very end of the game. And I'm like, I don't remember you saying that you didn't want to get flanked, right? Obviously you would say that if you were given the option, but I don't remember him saying it at all. And in the end, I'm like, well, and Alex was very gracious about it, going like, well, you do what you're gonna do, right? But that was my intention, that's what I said. And I went, well, do you just want to 4+ it then? And he went, I'm not comfortable with 4+ing it. It's a big part of the game, and he's right. If the 4+ goes my way, I turn what should be a crippling loss just based off matchup and scenario into at worst a draw for me, because no units can contest me on this hill at that point in the game. So I turn it into at worst a draw, probably a win, because that was also, that was when I was, I just failed against these Brock Riders, but I could turn around this token, focus everything there. Once I have this center token and these guys aren't here anymore, I can just grab that token, force it out. But yeah, so he makes his point heard, and I went, in some games I wouldn't allow that. I would just go, I'm obviously in your flank, I'm just going to take the flank. But in this game, we had been playing a lot with intention so far. I know Alex also forgot about this Dwarf Lord at least once, because it was in my back lines fighting against monsters that are all wings and hills, and so it's difficult to find your models, right? And I'd been like, yeah, just go back and take these attacks. So we had been playing the game so far with that as a core idea, and I went, I don't want to win against someone. In my mind, I did not tell Alex this at the time. I just said, no, I'll just charge you in the front, it'll be fine. But I didn't want to win this game off of a technicality, right? Like, I'd take the flank if it was an honest mistake, but Alex was adamant that he had told me that it was supposed to be in the front, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to win that way. So this is one of those things that I really respect in terms of sportsmanship, which is just someone being very clear about what they want and what they had intended. They're not trying to game you. They are trying to win, right? But this is what I'm after, right? There's no reason to be an asshole in your game. You can still show empathy. At the end of the day, it is, after all, a game. So yeah, kudos to Alex. I really love this game. I voted him very highly in sportsmanship due to standing his ground there. I think that's really important. So anyway, I lose this game. I didn't lose it by too much. I did manage to take one of the loot tokens in the end, so it was a 2-1 loss, and then we had just murdered each other. So not much in the way of attrition. But yeah, lovely game. Really cool. I look forward to playing Alex in the future. I learned a lot while playing this game. And moving on to day 2. So the start of day 2, yeah, as I said before, on Saturday we were so tired after 4 rounds. It was too much. I learned that the best of the rest was 3 rounds on day 2, and I went, if I had known that, I would not have played in the Masters. I would have gone, but I would have played in best of the rest. I have no interest in playing 4 games in a day ever. So anyway, so super tired. We went out to dinner. We started a whole joke called Emily, which is, it's a bit of an inside joke, but it's some of the fun stuff you miss out on if you don't go. It doesn't make any sense to anyone that wasn't there. So, and we drank a lot. I actually opened up a mixing bar because at some point we went to go get water from the grocery store, and I just came back with mixers and no water. So, it's just making old fashions and some just interesting drinks, right? And it was great. I loved talking to everyone. I got to meet Mark Cox. We are brothers from a different mother of spirit. So, it really fun. I really enjoyed it. So we went in day 2, and I had pretty high spirits. Unfortunately, I did end up playing one of my club mates. So, yikes. I'll show you that in a second. But first, let's talk about control. Control's an easy one. You divide the table up into 6. So 2x2 squares, right? 3 on your opponent, 3 on your side. And you get 1 VP at the end of the game for controlling them. You control it by having the majority of your base in it. If you're not clear, you declare which square you're in, right? And then you get 2 VP instead of 1 if you control the center of your opponent's side of the table. So simple scenario. I do like this one a bit more because it's a bit more about area control. So here is my opponent's list, and this is Ryan Munsell. If you have watched the channel, you know that Ryan and I play constantly. We live about 5 minutes apart, and I've known him for about 20 years. So it was a bit unfortunate to play him, but there is, there's a bit of nice in there too, which is I know I'm going to have a fun game against Ryan, so at least it was a sure thing, right? There are some people at the Masters, I'm not going to name names, that I don't like you as a person. So, it's nothing, well, I guess it is something against you, but I don't think we're going to have a good game. We're going to have a clash. And at least playing Ryan, I know we're not going to have one. So at least there's that. I would have preferred to play someone new, but here we are. So we have Ryan's list opens with a horde of Frostfang Cav with the Meat of Madness. Then we have a horde of Ice Elementals, followed by a horde of Snow Trolls with the Chalice of Wrath. Then a regiment of Thunderwolves, a Lord on Chimera, a Cavern Dweller, 2 regiments of Snow Foxes, an Ice Queen with Heal 5 and Surge 8 to replace Icy Breath, and a Thane with the Inspiring Talisman and Talinar Standard. For allies, Ryan brought some Forces of Nature with a horde of Earth Elementals and a Tree Herder. You guys have heard me talk about this list before, but I really like it. Northern Alliance is a very independent faction, meaning that each unit is independently powerful. So this is a bag of hammers, no doubt. It requires you to roll, not to mess up, not to get that variance where you're like, well, what if I double won this? But if you don't, this list is just hits like a ton of bricks. Really interesting and actually pretty fun to pilot too. So anyway, moving in to the game. I don't have too many pictures of this game, but it was interesting. I think I went first in this one, but I think Ryan actually won the roll-off and just made me go first. So because he wanted to be able to move into the, the table 6 at the end of the game, which is, fair enough. I moved forward. Ryan had put some Earth Elementals a bit forward to bait a charge, and I went, I mean, I know that's a bait, but I feel like I can kill it because I had a unit of Reapers. I had my Flesh Ripper, which I think that Ryan might have missed the Flesh Ripper, but it didn't matter too much. And then I also had my Vicious Bane Chanter, right? So I can charge in with these guys. It's not hindered, so it's about 17.5 hits on average. They are def 6, but I can get Bane Chant to put that down to 4s. You know, I get like 8 or 9 wounds right there. And so I get 8 or 9 wounds there. I can move a Dread in, and then I get like maybe 2 wounds from this guy. So 10 to 11 wounds plus a Dread, that's about a 6, 6 or a 7. And I'm like, you know what? Go big, go home. Right? Go big or go home. And I have 2 wins, 2 losses at this point, so who cares? I'm in contention for Countercharger, I guess. But I'm like, yeah, no, I'm going to go for it. And this is the first time in a long time that I played a tournament and risked it for that biscuit and got it. Because I, in the end, decided to not go for the Vicious because I wanted to make sure that the dragon couldn't charge me. And then I missed the Bane Chant, but then these two just roll out the box and kill off the Earth Elementals. I didn't roll too crazy. I got to a 10. I got them to 10 wounds, and then with Dread it's an 11. So I need a 7 twice and got it. But or no, maybe I got him to 11 wounds in the Thane. I think this is the Thane. So anyway. Yeah, I got them to a 7, and I got it twice and killed them, which is something I don't do very commonly. And I had blocked off the Tree Herder with my unit of Soul Flares, which is a common thing I do to Ryan. Actually, I remember... Oh, no, I went second. That's right. Ryan chose to go first because... No, he did go second because I always push back his Earth Elementals with Wind Blast. And he's like, not today. So, anyway, placing units behind him like a cheater. So anyway, I went into the Tree Herder. I didn't do too much. I think I did 3 wounds, which is actually pretty good considering I was hindered. So I'm hitting on 4s and wounding on 5s. 3 wounds, great. But it's gonna get the Aura of Life for 1 back, or Radiance of Life, so it's gonna be down to 2. But it is currently blocked in because these Frostbang could back up, right? But then they're out of the fight if they go too far to allow the Tree Herder, and if they don't go far enough, they're just gonna get charged by everything. So they pretty much choose to just let the Tree Herder take these charges. Tree Herder goes into the front because it could have gone into my Reapers instead. But anyway, goes into these guys, and then I'd gone in with my other Soul Flares into the Thunderwolves. Thunderwolves are very dangerous. I do about 5 wounds. In fact, I can read it right there. It says 5. I do 5 wounds. I get a lucky waiver. I'm all for that. I mean, these guys are probably dead, but anytime you can force a low unit count army like this, especially one split by these giant pieces of terrain, to fight you in dumb little fights, right? Have to put like a dragon into Soul Flares or a dragon into Chaff. It's good for you. So, as I alluded to before, I hate these 2 pieces of terrain, and not because I hate the terrain, like fully. I think they're gorgeous, really cool looking. I love playing on them. But having 2 of these on this table and having this table set up where they're set in the middle of the table. This day is the only day 1. I loved all my tables. They were interesting. I didn't want to play on them again. But for that one game, I was like, wow, this is really cool, really powerful. But this game really showed me what happens when you're on a table with the wrong terrain, because these are way bigger than most of the impassable pieces in the game, and they lock out a huge amount of room because of it. So I would say I love the concept of having the maps, but you need to make sure that your terrain, it doesn't need to be exactly the same, uniform, but needs to be closer. This is about twice as big as any of the other ones, right? And then this one's about 20% bigger. So I guess not any of the other ones, but this is about twice as big as the rest of them. So anyway, that's my small terrain spiel. And yeah, so the game goes about how you'd expect. On this left side, I just completely dominated. The Tree Herder, I get a luck sack kill it by just charging some hindered Reapers in real quick. Just got a 1-shot, so both the Def 6 units got 1-shot. The Frostbang get 1-shot without doing anything because I send my Doppelgangers in. I pop my token, so I have Strider, I Bane Chant them, and they just 1-shot these. I continue Lightning Bolting the dogs and getting waivers, which are pretty good for the time being. And then, unfortunately, on this side of the table, which is obviously my weak side, my opponent put way more than my 2 units. So, but they do pretty well, which is stuff like, I didn't think about, because we don't just put big impassable pieces in the middle of the table, because this is a pretty big gun lane, right? Like, if you get onto this hill, the entirety of the table, actually, more like this, right? So like all of this is no cover, right? That's a mess. That's a huge amount of room. So these ice elementals get onto the hill, shoot at my planar apparition, which again, why does Icy Breath not take stealthy? Lightning Bolt, Fireball, Icy Breath, they should all take stealthy or cover like they didn't. Well, I guess Icy Breath didn't exist, but as those spells did in version 2. Anyway, it doesn't take the stealthy and just one-shots my planar apparition, which I wasn't thinking about when I when I moved in here. Granted, I would have done it anyway because I needed that dread to go for this 7. But yeah, bit of a small fail there, which is, you know, my opponent capitalizing and not rolling like poop. So gets the kill there. These units, I mean, I thought my butchers might be able to hold up for 2 rounds against the bears, because I do use some Wind Blast shenanigans to move these units to not be able to double charge me. But they kill me in 1, which they can do. I mean, they're a very powerful unit. They just hit on a 4+, so it's a bit of variance. But yeah, they kill me off. I've got another unit of scarecrows over here. They all get killed pretty easily, and so Ryan mounts a fighting defense. But at the end of the game, it's just these units and the dragon are alive, and then these Thunderwolves. Because as I said before, I opened with that really lucky waver, but then I keep just wavering him. So I get them up to, I believe they're at 10 or 11 wounds in round 6. I charge in with my Soul Flares unhindered, so I'm hitting on 3s, winning on 2s, and I roll 9 1s and 2s to hit. So some pretty bad dice there, and that's super unfortunate because I also thought Thunderwolves were unit strength 2, but they're obviously unit strength 3, and yeah, I mean, there's a lot of little things where, like, you know, I was rushing through my last turn, but then we were told we could just sort of, you know, ignore our clocks and finish out our turn, you know. So Ryan got to finish out a turn by like actually paying attention to the game as opposed to what I did, which is nothing against him. It's just, you know, something that happened. I'm like, well, I wish I had been, you know, I wish I had done that during my turn. So anyway, I end up with, so if we split this into, I don't know why I drew it like that. If we split this into 6, Ryan ends up having this one and this one. And then I have, we're both R. I'll be V. So I have this one for 2, right? And then I have this one. But unfortunately, because I rolled so poorly on this, Ryan gets it because he has 3 to my 2. I could have put a 3rd point in there as well, you know, and forced to win. But the end, it ends up being a tie due to that poor dice roll. But really exciting game, really fun. I had a great time. The only real issue I had with it was that we had to go ask about how does sportsmanship work, because we voted at the end of round 5, which I also think is a little weird. Why do you not vote for round 6? Like, if you're not going to vote for round 6, why not just do it at the end of day 1? Vote for your first 4. Who cares? And we were told, since we played each other, we just couldn't vote each other number 1. And I'm like, well, I mean, Josh was gonna be probably my number 1 unless round 6 is bonkers. But still, I don't like being told that I can't do it just because we're club mates. If that's a big issue, we shouldn't be able to be paired against each other, period. Or just get rid of the fucking favorite opponent part of, you know, overall. Just move it to its own category. Anyway. So that's my only that was my only problem with the game. Otherwise, lovely game. And here we go. Oh, here's just another pretty picture. One thing I will say about this area, I mean, the place we were in was really cool, really interesting in terms of the playing games, and part of that was the lighting was fantastic, just super bright. Could really see everything going on. Anyway, let's go into round 6, which was Raise. Raise is another scenario I actually really like because it is a progressive scenario, which, if you're going to have a good scenario, it's probably progressive. So progressive scenarios are really good. You get 1 objective in the center of the field. That one cannot be messed with, but then each player gets 3 more objectives that they place on their opponent's side of the field, more on the 6-inch from the center line, right? So 18 inches in from the deployment zone, or from the table edge. Right? And at the end, starting on the end of round 2, you can then burn them to gain 1 victory point. So you get 1 victory point for every one that you burn on your opponent's side of the field. The 3 on your side, you can only contest. You can stop your opponent from getting them. That's it. And then you get 1 BP for controlling the center objective at the end, which I think is a nice concession towards having end of game scoring. So really cool scenario. I love Raise. I think it's one of the best ones in the pack. Moving forward into the game, I played against Matt Carmack, who is, I should say, again, Ryan Muzzle from the Pacific Northwest. And I don't think I said Alex. Alex is from the Mid-Atlantic, I believe. And then we have Matt Carmack from the South, I think. Don't quote me on that. Pretty sure Matt's from the South, though. Playing Empire of Dust, another army I love and have some design issues with in version 3. But we open with 4 regiments of Revenant Cav, one of whom have the Jesse's Boots of Striding. Then we have an Enslaved Guardian Horde with the Aegis of the Elohi, 2 Revenant Cav troops, 2 Ammonite Pharaohs on chariots, one of whom has the Blade of Slashing, Apophis, Shobek, and a Revenant Champion with Tome of Darkness and Undead Horse. Really interesting list, but this is one of the problems I have with Empire of Dust, which is they only have 6 units that unlock, and 2 of them are just Skeleton Warriors versus Skeleton Spearmen. They're just, do you have a pointy stick or not? And that is a huge problem in terms of list diversity. There's just not a whole lot you can do with Empire of Dust, especially because you could just play Undead. And Undead have almost all the Empire of Dust units, or at least an analogous unit, and, you know, have a million other units that unlock. So yeah, at least Matt showed up with an interesting army that really plays towards his character. But there's some other issues, one being Apophis. Why are you Spellcaster 0? I mean, I get it from a lore perspective, but from a mechanic, that's a terrible idea because, again, I had the Trickster staff, so I have Hex. And I have a problem when you introduce a stat that is lore-derived, so Spellcaster level in this edition, and then also have a mechanic based off of it. They don't mix together, right? So either have Hex just affect units, or say it doesn't affect non-character units, because there are no non-character units that are Spellcaster 1. So just do that if you want it to be a lore ability, or don't have Apophis be fucking 0. So anyway, that's that. And lastly, I want to talk about the Revenant Champion. This is a good example of some of the internal issues with Empire Dust versus external balance issues, which is you can always bring a Rev Champion with Tome of Darkness for your Surge capabilities, but the reason people do this is because the Cursed High Priest is super overcosted. It's just look at it and I'm like, well, why? A Cursed High Priest is essentially the Lich King, I think it's called in Undead, only it's not as good at all, and it's slightly cheaper. But then there's not a Necromancer variant. There's not just a Cursed Priest, right, that you can bring that's just a Necromancer, right? So I just look at this and I go, this is a good example of people are not bringing Cursed High Priests, or at least not bringing more than one, and are more likely just to bring the Revenant Champion on horse with the Tome of Darkness because it's cost effective. There's a problem with your pricing then. You can remove some rules from the Cursed High Priest, I don't really care. You can introduce a Cursed Priest and just have a Necromancer, right? There's lots of ways to do it, but you got to do something from an internal balance issue. Anyway, enough about Empire of Dust. So let's talk about the game itself, which unfortunately I didn't take any pictures of, so I stole this from the internet. This is Matt Carmack playing against Jeremy Duval. It's a bit blurry, but you get a picture, you get an idea of Matt's army. I know Matt used to run a chariot, just all chariots, which was a cool army. Obviously you can't do it anymore, but I really liked his army. I thought he was interesting. He had a lot of lore elements. He was explaining his story to me, which was pretty cool. This was Shobek, which is obviously way too big. It's on a 75 base, but Matt brought, I believe this is the model right here, on a 50, just to go, you know, if you have a problem with the 75, you can choose at the beginning of the game, do you want it to be on the 50 or the 75? And I went, I don't care, it's round 6. And he went, cool, I've not had to use the proxy base the whole time, which I thought was pretty cool myself. Anyway, huge model, Nagash, enormous. So because this is so blurry, we're just gonna go and look at a picture of my army, again, stolen from the internet, and talk about the game a little bit. So Raze, the reason I didn't take many pictures of the game, besides it was just round 6 and I was tired, was that on round 2, Matt and I realized that we had a tie game. Because the map was, so if I draw just a simple map, there's the center objective, and then I had about 2 over here and 1 over here, and I think Matt's were like this, right? Just whatever. And the center objective had 2 big ol' forests, right? just right around them. And since neither of us had Pathfinder, we were just sort of in the forest staring at each other. I mean, he had one strider, I had one strider, but the second one of us engages, that unit just gets swamped and dies, right? And Matt made it very clear that he was going to play for the tie, because he's faster than I am, but I do way more damage, and I have the lightning bolt and wind blast for, you know, a little bit of shenanigans at the end of the game if I want. So yeah, Matt's like, I'm never going to engage you, and I went, well, I mean, I have nothing against that playstyle. I think, you know, it's obviously the right move. Nothing against Matt, who I otherwise had a very lovely game playing against, but I flew a long way to play this game, over 2,000 miles. I'm gonna fucking play the game. So I played it. So I just charged in and went for some boxcar charges where, like, I send the scarecrows into enslaved guardians and try to kill them in one go just to get the ball rolling. And Matt went, okay, well, if you want to take the loss, I will oblige. And I didn't get my boxcars, so Matt just starts dismantling my units and really taking the objectives pretty easily. And at the end of the game, it's obviously, you know, he wins, but our round time is called. And at the beginning of the game, I had said, do you want to play with clocks? And he went, well, are you a fast player? And I am a fast player. But we spent a lot of time just talking about our thoughts on the game as a whole, our thoughts on Empire of Dust, our thoughts on what was going on in the game we were playing, not so much. But yeah, we were just talking a lot, and the round time was called. And I went, here's the thing. If we get one more turn, I'm not going to get a turn. Because all my stuff is going to be dead. But I currently have quite a few models, right? I don't have any tokens, but I have a ton of models on the table, right? Good attrition. But if we take another turn, you're going to kill me. So what do you want to do? And Matt, being very gracious as a winner, went, we will just stop playing, right? And yeah, I was trying to intimate, I'm not sure if I succeeded, in the same way that Alex was earlier, which is, I'm not saying that if you want to play out the turn because we didn't play with a clock, that there's anything particularly wrong with that, because you'll kill all my models. But obviously it's in my best interest that all my models don't die. And, you know, just stuff like that. And so it's like, it takes a lot from someone to do what Matt did there, which is just going, you know, you can escape with your dignity, essentially. After I'd gone, I refused to just go down without swinging. So yeah, really cool guy, really cool game. It was unfortunate that was my last game, because I did not want to end the tournament going like, we're going to get a 10-10 tie, but not like the fun kind where you fight it out. The kind where you never leave your deployment zone and just stare at each other, and at the end of the game, you just jump on the objectives, but we jump on the same objectives. So I was unwilling to do it. I won't do it ever. I mean, I might do it in the future. But anyway, I end up with a loss there. And as far as the tournament goes, I really liked it. I'll get into my thoughts on my overall placement, on the games, on my list, and on the event in the next bit. But for now, we'll just leave it there and hope to see you next time. Bye.